Okay, so I'm Louise and I'm 30 years of age, and I grew up in a normal nuclear family, and I had my mum and my dad and my sister. She's 2 years younger than I am, and I guess, I never thought anything to be different from that. Like every other child that I went to school with and played with at Brownies and so forth. But I guess a couple of years ago now, when I was 27, I found out that I was donor conceived. So my dad wasn't able to conceive children, and he found that out before my parents got married. So that time, that revelation was a fairly significant period in our life, and for my sister and I found out first, and I found out by a non-family member, which was fairly challenging, and I rang my mum and I said, look, you really need to, we need to sit down tonight and you need to tell my sister. I couldn't carry that news on my own. So that conversation was pretty hard, and I guess from that sort of the ripple effect, I guess, a fairly significant period of conflict, and I think it was just really hard to understand, that the withholding of a secret that was, part of the way in which we'd come into the world, which I don't think anyone should be ashamed of. So I think it took quite a bit of time for my sister and I to come to a point where we could even talk about it ourselves. I guess it's sort of like grief, if something happens within your family or something's not the way you envisaged it to be, that takes time to understand and be able to talk about that. I guess another added layer for me was that when I was 16, my dad passed away. So I guess in thinking about what this has meant to me, not having my dad talk to about this has been fairly significant. I guess, there's a lot of unanswered questions, and things that I'd just like to be able to tell him that it's okay, that I'm really, despite the quiver in my voice, I feel, so blessed that they undertook this procedure to have me and to have my sister. So I think, it's a shock and a challenge to your personal identity, and it's the way that you have always perceived yourself to be and the way that you'll be in the future. And I guess another sort of complicating factor, if we needed any more, was the fact that my sister and I are not from the same donor, and that was something that was taken out of the hands of my parents, so they didn't have a choice in that. And so I think, that brought up another lot of stuff, I guess, for my sister and I. But, thinking back over all of this and having some time to reflect, I guess, about 3 years on now, like I said, I'm eternally grateful for what they went through, and know that it was really hard. I think, the secret is something that, like Ross described, it's a really, I can't imagine how challenging that was for them to hold on to that. But I think, there are many challenging conversations, and I work with families and, talk to them about many challenging conversations that you have with your kids over time, in puberty, and you have to talk about sex and all these, things. And I think it's one of those conversations. Maybe not everyone has to have it, but if that's a part of your life and you're proud of, be proud of the way that your kids have come into the world, and be able to share that with them, and do that at a time perhaps is not going to be a perfect time, but just give it a go, like you do with many other things. My mum kept saying, I meant to tell you, and I thought about telling you at this time, and then I thought about it another year later, and I searched for information, and I really just wanted to have the answers. And maybe there's not the answers, maybe there's still no answers today, as many of us sit here. But I guess at the moment, I'm not actually sure. I sit in an uncertainty at the moment. I'm not sure whether I want to know who my donor is. You know, I had a beautiful dad and cherished every day the relationship we shared. So I think for me, you know, Mum didn't need to come to me with an answer. I wanted to know and be able to have an open conversation with her and for her to share what this has meant to her. So I think, you know, maybe I could, you know, suggest that maybe having done that a bit earlier in my life, maybe things, the relationship would have been a bit better and perhaps held, you know, I think the longer that the secret's held, maybe the more awkward that conversation becomes, you know, I guess just seeing it from my perspective. And I guess the other thing too is it's hard, so even though I'm in an uncertainty, or sitting in uncertainty at the moment, not knowing whether I want to find out who my donor is or not, I guess we, given that we're born before a certain time, don't have a lot of choices either. So that is something that we have to live with, and hopefully, you know, young people of the future won't have to. But you know, that's, I guess, a challenge and a talk for another day. But yeah, thanks for hearing me.